Hi, it's Brian Winter. The Americas Society Gallery in New York is truly a fantastic place to see art from Latin America. Our next exhibit is called Amazonia Azul, bringing together paintings, sculptures, photographs, and more from around the Amazon. The show is co-curated by representatives from all 9 countries of the Amazon region. It opens on September 3rd. We hope to see you there. This is the America's Quarterly Podcast. I'm Brian Winter. After years of leftist rule, Bolivia looks set for major change. In today's episode, we'll look at both candidates in the upcoming October runoff election and what they might do to Bolivia's economy, critical minerals sector, and geopolitical alliances.
Both of them, Rodrigo and Tuto Quiroga, I think that they're going to totally change the position internationally. All this thing that we were part of the socialismo del siglo XXI, we're going to abandon that. Rodrigo and Tuto, much more Tuto Quiroga, are very against Venezuela's government, Nicaragua's, Cuba's, but also Rodrigo. Maybe the rhetoric changes a little bit, but Rodrigo is very clear in the sense that we cannot be near any ideas similar to the Venezuela's ideas.
When Bolivians went to the poll last Sunday to elect a new president, it was evident they were looking for change. After 20 years in which politics were dominated by the ruling MAS, the Movimiento al Socialismo party. Well, there's no doubt now that change is coming after the MAS's candidate received just 3% of the vote. Testimony to public anger over the country's economic crisis, gasoline shortages, high inflation, as well as political infighting within the MAS itself. That said, there was a surprise in the voting. Senator Rodrigo Paz Pereira, the son of a former president, finished first with 32% in a crowded field. Former President Jorge Tuto Quiroga came in second with 27%. A runoff between those two is now set for October 19th. On today's podcast, we'll explore the differences between those two candidates, but also some of the bigger questions facing Bolivia. Will either candidate be able to revive an economy that has been largely cut off from foreign investment in recent years? Can Bolivia finally realize its potential in areas like lithium and other critical minerals? Will either leader be able to effectively govern in a country that is known for its ethnic and geographic divisions? And what is the future of the leftist MAS in a region where we've certainly seen lots of surprising political comebacks over the years? Our guest is Raúl Peñaranda. He is a Bolivian journalist and editor of the Brújula Digital news portal. Raúl, welcome back to the AQ Podcast.
Hi, Brian. Good to see you again.
Likewise, Raúl. Well, so we're recording this about a day and a half after polls closed. So let me start with a broad question here. What did the first round of this election tell us about politics in Bolivia?
I think that this outcome is reflecting real change in Bolivia, the end of a political cycle. Now we are entering another. After 20 years of big wins of the MAS party, Evo Morales first and then President Luis Arce, with more than 50% of the votes, sometimes more than 60% of the votes. That was really something huge. And now 86% of people voted for options contrary or different or critical to the MAS party, and only 13% of the vote for different MAS factions.
I want to make this episode mainly about this new cycle, but first, just to understand, I want to know a little bit more about how we got to this result, because as you said, the numbers are staggering. A party that has been in power for so long, their candidate only received 3% of the vote. I know that there's an economic crisis in Bolivia. There were many years where things went really well economically under the MAS. That has not been the case for some time now. But how do you get to 3%? It's such a low number. How did we get here?
Yeah. First, the economic crisis, the fact that we don't have gasoline, we don't have diesel, we have to stay in the line for hours or sometimes days to get our tanks filled. Inflation is another aspect that is so important now, especially for poor people, because the inflation for food is very high. We have the second highest inflation in the region after Venezuela's, and we don't have dollars in our economy, and that has make all the import products very expensive. So that's one of the reasons. Of course, the other is this fight between Evo Morales and other leaders of the MAS party, and also 20 years is a long time, even with a good government. One political party in power for 20 years is long in any country, and of course, also in Bolivia.
We should note that former President Evo Morales is also facing criminal charges for statutory rape. He's accused of fathering a child with a 15-year-old back in 2015. Morales has denied the allegations, claims that they're politically motivated, but he has been living and operating in the Chapare region of Bolivia, protected by his supporters. I mean, that's a strange situation that may have contributed to this electoral outcome. At the same time, Raul, in 25 years of following Latin American politics, I've learned to never declare anybody's political career over. People thought Lula's career was over in Brazil at one point when he was in jail. That proved not to be the case. People have declared Bolsonaro, Peronismo, Kirchnerismo, all of these movements that appeared to be kind of on their way out at one point have shown life, especially when they're associated with, good times, with the commodities boom in the past and the way that Evo's was. I mean, what's your feeling? Is this just a temporary setback for MAS and for Evo Morales, or is there something deeper happening here?
We have difficulties for the MAS to recover. Look, Evo Morales is disqualified to participate in new elections because of this ruling of the Constitutional Court. So being disqualified, bare to participate again as a candidate, that puts him in a very weak and awkward position. How can for him to be doing politics in Bolivia in the future if he cannot run to be president, right? And then all the other leaders of the MAS party, Eduardo del Castillo, that got 3%, and Andrónico, that got 7%, they are also with these low numbers now. So how can they really think that they could lead again the movement for the future? Probably some other leader could appear, but I think that the next 5 years are going to be very, very hard for the MAS party and that movement. To the contrary, for the right, it's going to be easier, I think, because there are many possible candidates for the next cycle in 5 years, There are other candidates that are trying to get there. But in the sector of Evo Morales and the MAS party, I don't see anyone.
Okay, so let's talk now about the field of candidates. And let's start with the guy that everybody has questions about, and that is Senator Rodrigo Paz Pereira. He is, as I noted in the introduction, the son of a former president. The reason people have questions about him is because he kind of came out of nowhere. Polls did not show him getting into the runoff. So what can you tell us about him? And is he the front runner at this point?
I think that he is. I think that he's better situated than Tuto. Rodrigo is someone really in the center right, we could say, but he's kind of middle of the road kind of candidate. Okay, he's a moderate, and his rhetoric is very moderate, and I think that being positioned in the center left, we can say, but in the center, I think that helps him to get more votes to the center left and to the far left.
One interpretation, Raul, I heard was that he was acceptable to former MAS voters who want change but were not willing to vote for a classic conservative in the mold of Tuto Quiroga.
That is what I was going to say. There were a number of voters that were undecided before the election. And apparently, most of those undecided electors went to Rodrigo's candidacy. But also he has an important running mate, former police captain Edman Lara, that has connections with the popular vote, with popular sectors. He's a surprise. We have one surprising candidate that is Rodrigo, but the other one is Edman Lara. But yes, part of the base of Rodrigo is a base that used to vote in the past for the mass party, and they were really now thoroughly in the mood to change their vote, but not so far as Tuto and Samuel Doria Medina, but apparently in the last weeks they found Rodrigo.
One slogan that Rodrigo Paz Pereira has used repeatedly during his campaign is capitalism for all, not just a few. And that tells you a bit of his story, right? A guy who's trying to meld multiple visions. Just to be clear, though, you see him as a center-ish kind of candidate.
Look, it depends who has an opinion about him. For some people, he's a rightist, and for others, he's a leftist. I think that is kind of a third way in the way of Tony Blair some years ago in England. Someone that tries to avoid this discussion between left and right. I would say that he's a liberal in the sense that he believes in democracy, in due process, rule of law, right? All those things. Of course, also free market. But he's also trying to appeal to these more middle class or lower class sectors in Bolivia that they are the majority in the country. So it's hard to put a name for him, and especially and harder to try to make sense of his running mate, that he is much more populist, is populist. In some ways, he's similar to other mass party leaders. So now we have this combination, that strange combination that won the election.
How important is the endorsement of Paz from Samuel Doria Medina, a center-right business leader who finished in third place?
I think that is important. Doria Medina got 20% of the vote. So let's say that half of that would support Rodrigo. Rodrigo had 32 plus 10 is 42, is getting closer to 50%, plus this 12% that voted for different factions of the mass party. He could be near or over 50%. So it's important. Maybe the other 10% of Samuel's base would go to Tuto, because Samuel is a center-right candidate and Tuto is more in the right. But I think that is important. At least he has some support now at the beginning of the campaign for the runoff. And I think that is going to help him.
Raul, let's talk about the other candidate in the runoff. It's conservative former President Jorge Tuto Quiroga. He is an engineer. He was educated in the United States. I have met him. I mean, he sounds American when he speaks English. He worked for IBM for a long time and decided to go back to Bolivia to work in politics. He joined the National Democratic Action. This was the conservative party founded by Hugo Banzer, who was a dictator of Bolivia in the 1970s and then democratically elected in the 90s. Bear with me here. Quiroga was his vice president. Banzer resigned. Quiroga was briefly president himself. He represents the right, to some extent, the economic establishment as well. What are his chances, and what is your read of his politics?
Everything that you said, I think that paints him very clearly. He is the candidate of the establishment and of the right, and he's conservative. And he has some allies that are very conservative. Some of his allies are near Bolsonaro's views. But he's a smart guy. He's a good at doing campaigns. He has a very important advisor who's Duran Barba, the famed Ecuadorian political and electoral advisor. And Duran Barba made him a very palatable kind of candidate in the first round. But being the candidate of the establishment and being so conservative in a country like Bolivia, where we have all the conditions that indigenous population, very big kind of middle, lower class probably now to being the candidate of the establishment is not the best thing to win the election. Probably is probably Captain Lara, running mate of Rodrigo, is much more suitable for the social conditions of Bolivia.
I'm sure at least part of our audience is wondering, though, at a time when right-wing leaders seem ascendant in many countries, ahead in the polls in Chile, Colombia, competitive in Brazil. We've had the qualified success of leaders like Javier Milei and Nayib Bukele. People may be asking, well, maybe this is what people in Bolivia want too.
Of course. And he got a very solid 27, 28%, which in Bolivia in these conditions is high. And that there are a number of important sectors of society that think as you do. But also, the Mass Party was winning only 5 years ago with 55% of the vote. Some of that vote, I think that even could go to Tuto's candidacy. But I think that the majority is kind of in the middle. But you're right, Milei, Bolsonaro won, Bukele, etc. But I think that Bolivian mood and society probably is not going that far.
Well, so let's talk about the situation that awaits whoever of these two candidates emerges victorious. And, I have visited Bolivia many times over the years. I, as a young reporter, visited La Paz in order to cover one of the many periods of social unrest during the early 2000s. And so when I see a situation like this, my mind immediately turns to one word, and that word is governability. How will either of these people be able to govern a country that is fractious even by the standards of Latin America because of geography, because of race, because of different political ideas, and so on? And even more so considering everything that you've been talking about, Raul, which is the massive popularity of the MAS until relatively recently in terms of political timing. So how I know that there's a lot of interest in Bolivia now. There are people saying, hey, look, there's opportunities here for lithium and other critical minerals, and the potential that the country could be open for business again for both foreign and domestic investment. How cautious are you about this governability challenge given the country's past and present?
Bolivia is a very unstable country, as you said. It's sad to say, but it's true. And we'll have the next president will have to take tough economic decisions, So we have there, of course, possible problems, but also when 86% of the valid vote is trying to go in some direction, I think that the next government can make the changes that the government thinks that they have to make. And I think that the government could be successful. At the beginning, we're going to have blockades and everything. That's part of the Bolivian way of doing politics. But after that, maybe first trimester or semester, probably will have the chance in the medium term, the government could do more stuff. But it's tough. Now, Evo Morales, as I said, is now in the margins of politics. He's not the guy that used to be. That's one factor that I think that is reducing the chances of instability. And the other thing is that any of the two candidates need to have governability in Congress, right? A deal, a pact, an alliance. Rodrigo can have with Samuel Doria, it's enough for them. Only Rodrigo and Samuel, they have majority in both chambers, So for both of them, they are going to, of course, to have as a main objective to have governability in Congress. But that's half of the picture. The other half is the streets. But I think that also we are tired. Bolivians are tired of this economic crisis, especially the thing about gasoline and diesel. Hours or days. Can you imagine all the drivers, the truck and bus drivers, the transportation sector in Bolivia, all the guys that work, that we have the minibuses in our cities to transport people. All these guys are now spending sometimes days trying to get diesel or gasoline. So I think that even that is like, okay, we have now a very low priced gasoline. The price has to go up. But now with those low prices, we don't have gasoline or we don't have diesel. So even though I think that it's going to be difficult, I think that also there are going to be opportunities for the next government.
It's interesting listening to you speak, Raul. It does sound a little bit like the dynamic in Argentina during and after the 2023 election. And you've made clear that, a carbon copy of Javier Milei is not in the cards. But this idea of, a really severe economic crisis, a longstanding left-leaning political movement that had run its course, that was to a large extent discredited, at least in the short term, and a society that was willing to endure some kind of short-term sacrifice in the name of change. Have either of the candidates spoken about what change would look like in the clear terms that Javier Milei did during the Argentine campaign? Because I've always felt like one of the things that protected Milei once he came to office was that he had campaigned so unambiguously on the idea of cutting government, of short-term sacrifice. I mean, he had the chainsaw. It doesn't get any more clear than that. Have the rhetoric of either Paz or Quiroga nodded in some of those directions, or have they had very different language?
They have been very clear in at least one aspect, and that's the price of gasoline, internal price of fuel. That's both have been very clear that the price has to go up. Now, as you know, we import fuel in international prices, and we sell it internally very cheaply. And the government has not the money to keep doing that, and that's why we have the long lines. The price has to go maybe to double or maybe triple. Can you imagine for a poor country with that instability past and tradition, when the price of fuel goes up, to double or triple, it's going to be hard. The other thing is that we have a fiscal deficit and we need to close or try to privatize, but I don't think it's going to be possible. Many state-run companies that are broke in bankruptcy right now. And also both of them have said that this has to change. But not much more than that. Tuto Quiroga has said that he's going to go to the IMF to get funds needed to recover or to have more dollars in the economy. Rodrigo has said that he doesn't want to go to the IMF. But anyway, he needs dollars. So probably at the end, he's going to go there. I think that the situation of Argentina was worse than Bolivia. Much more inflation. We have 30% inflation in the last 12 months, but Argentina had, I don't know.
It was more than 200%. It was a lot.
More than 200. And a much bigger government. Our government is smaller. We have to cut some excesses there, but it's not that much. So I think that the main obstacle and problem that the next government is going to have is the internal fuel prices, one, and second, devaluation. We have to devaluate the Bolivian money currency. It is in the streets. It's double, 14 Bolivians against 7, right? But it's not official. And that's the second thing that the government has to do. I think that doing those two things after that is going to be maybe a little bit easier for the rest of the term.
Geopolitically for Bolivia, what is likely to happen under either of these two leaders? And I ask because, there's been some commentary in the press that, that China may be a loser from this outcome. They had close relations with the MAS. There's been some speculation that it could lead to a warmer relationship with the United States, especially if Quiroga ends up being the winner. I have to say, Bolivia's relative isolation on the world stage over the last 10 to 15 years is really striking for a country of its size. I've never completely understood it. And the reason I say that is because there are countries in the region that have, worse economies, but yet are still present in kind of geopolitics in a way that Bolivia has not been. I mean, it really has been quite isolated in my view. So, what do you see as the most likely outcome for this?
Yeah, both of them, Rodrigo and Tuto Quiroga, I think that they're gonna totally change the position internationally. All this thing that we were part of the socialismo del siglo XXI, we're gonna abandon that. Rodrigo and Tuto, much more Tuto Quiroga, are very against Venezuela's government, Nicaragua's, Cuba's, but also Rodrigo. Maybe the rhetoric changes a little bit, but Rodrigo is very clear in the sense that we cannot be near any ideas similar to the Venezuela's ideas. But China is the most important commercial trade partner of Bolivia, right? We import, as many other countries, much of our imports come from China. And also we export, especially minerals, to China. So I think that both of them are going to treat China kind of well. Russia is different. With China, we have also some economic interest here in Bolivia, especially lithium. But I think that Tuto and Rodrigo they're going to try to be far away from Russian interests. And we have another important ally in Bolivia for the Mass Party, which is Iran. And I think that also towards Iran, we don't have anything in common. We don't have trade. We don't have cultural ties. Nothing that can really you could say that is important for the Bolivian economy or society. But it wasn't politically important for the Mass Party, and I think that that's going to be also cut probably. And I think that we are going to, both of them, Tuto Quiroga and Rodrigo, are going to try to open the country for business again, to have foreign investments. Lithium is one thing, minerals, but we have other commodities too, and other products. And I think that both of them are going to try to get a better relationship with the US. Tuto, I think, is going to have much more chances to do that, but Rodrigo is going to try also to normalize our relationship with the US. You know that we don't have an ambassador. We are one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a US ambassador for maybe 20 years now or 15, I don't know. I think that both of them, Rodrigo and Tuto Quiroga, will try to normalize that and have, again, ambassadors in each country.
Raúl, my final question for you is an economic one, and it has to do with what you just mentioned, critical minerals and the policy changes that Bolivia needs in order to realize its full potential there. It's a country that, even by the standards of Latin America, has a difficult, tragic history when it comes to extractive industries over the course of many years. Everybody recognizes its potential for lithium and with other minerals, as you just mentioned. But concretely, what has to happen in order for some of that activity to take place, in your view?
Thank you, Brian. I think that rule of law, we don't have actual rule of law. Let's speak also about natural gas. We have to explore much more. But you are right, Brian, that we have been as a extractivism model. We had that for centuries, and we kept as a poor country. So maybe we should try to do some things differently. Of course, we have to try to, of course, go to minerals and lithium and natural gas, but we should try also other products. For example, Bolivia produces wine. And maybe never knows, we have a very, very good wine, high altitude wines, so called, but in very small amounts. We have chocolate also in small amounts. We have coffee, very good coffee, also in small amounts. Maybe with more investment, maybe opening our markets, we could have also that sectors that are much better for the economy So that's also a possibility and a challenge for the next government.
I look forward to drinking a fine Bolivian wine with you in a more prosperous Bolivia sometime soon. Raúl, thank you so much for joining us on the AQ podcast.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you for listening to the America's Quarterly podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review, give us a rating, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The America's Quarterly podcast is produced and edited by Luisa Franco. Our sound engineer is Gabriela Baez.